Hey, Nani here from Nani Snook, Wounded Warrior's Widow, and hashtag Frog, Fully Rely on God. Today is Sunday, September 1st, hey, September. And I have for the last week, in my morning devotions, been hearing about, maybe it's been 10 days, about, our stories and how we do our part by telling people about God by telling our stories. Because there's nothing that gets to one's heart or is more authentic than relaying our personal stories, such as who is God to you, who is Jesus to you, and what has God done for you? What does that mean? What does that look like in your life? And this is really for a lot of people, and again, I've done this a few times. I will be 59 in a few months, and at age 50, this is just kind of like, you got to bear this in mind for my story, which was very unusual back in the 60s. I was born autistic. Did not get diagnosed till age 50. When my 12-year-old son, he was 11 or 12, and he was diagnosed. And when you're doing the interviews and in the testing, it's a lot easier in children, and I'm filling out the questionnaires and talking to the counselors and um, psychologists. I'm like, oh my gosh, so much of this I'm resonating with. So I said something, and I began the testing and the interviews, and then it was like, yeah, yes, that's you. And then I proceeded to cry for a year or two because it explained so much about my life. I am what they used to call an Aspie or Asperger's, high functioning, which to me just simply means, and this was the big thing only thing I liked about myself growing up as a child, mm, was that I had a high IQ. I mean, I was only allowed to skip a grade. My mom wouldn't let me skip more. Um, so, that was the one thing. I could learn whatever I wanted to learn. And my gifting is not numbers, nor is my son's. Like, there's some TV shows. Slips my head with Sheldon and all those kids, and they're just like whizzes with numbers and that kind of thing. That's not what all autistics look like, or Asperger's look like. Um, so there you go. We tend to be very literal, and we can hyper focus like nobody. And when we study or research or learn, it's on. I mean, we're going to know it. I have many things I've been to school for, or had this or had that, um, but I wasn't allowed to practice a lot out in the world. That's a whole other story. So bear that in mind because when you go, this backstory. My dad is German American, first generation born American. They came from Germany legally. Oh my goodness. I'm outside, and South Carolina, we have gnats. I thought I was close enough to the fan. Anyway, and very spiritually gifted, healing gifted, knowledge gifted people, for those with gifts of the Spirit. My dad comes from the Catholic, spiritual upbringing, and he was the youngest by, I believe it was, I don't know, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years or something. I don't know. He was the white sheep of the family. For instance, both of his sisters were married, and his brother was already in a juvenile home, if that tells you anything. They all had the same father, and then when my dad came along, in fact, my grandmother didn't know she was pregnant. She had been having issues, went in for they call that to have female surgery, every uterus and everything taken out, hysterectomy. And the doctor came out, German doctor came out and told my biological German grandfather that, oh, she's pregnant. She's about 5 months along or whatever. So my grandmother, because my biological grandfather was reportedly an alcoholic who routinely drank away his paycheck. But anyway, they didn't tell her, and so when she went into labor, she didn't know, and she didn't know that until after she had him, which prompted her to then leave, and big thing back in the 40s, a divorce. My biological grandfather sent my dad to live with her family until she got on her feet, and then she sent for him and brought him home. So that was a quick history on my dad. My mom is, we call it Euro-Black, a very mixed, albeit lots of digging to find that out on her side. Irish Scotch, and either Native American or Black. We can't figure it out, because if you are into, quote, conspiracy theories and history, which isn't his story anyway, I'm still digging on that, while trying not to use this 23andMe and Ancestry.com, because those are bad if you know. If you didn't, they are, and just run with it. So anyway, and but again, very spiritually aware people, but she was, a quote, of the Protestant. She converted to Catholicism to marry my dad, and there we go. And they both walked away from whatever they were in at the time. Well, my dad left, just stopped going to Catholic Church. Something about saints and being, some of them were taken away and then new ones. I don't know. But anyway, and I grew up wanting to be a priest and a nun, or a nun, when I found out women couldn't be priests. I'm like, okay, I want to be a nun. And then they said, of course, nuns couldn't marry, and that was not part of my okay, because I knew I was born maternal and I was going to be a mom. And, the way you have to be married to be a mom. So it was always being a mom. Anyway, so there went that. Many years later, I got ordained on the Protestant side, and I'm trying to go back to their family roots in the Orthodox Underground Church. Anyway, so I was the first child of my parents. My due date was October 31st. I came 19 days later, in November, and ta-da, there we go. My mom had a lot of issues, etc. and so forth. They ended up going to a church was really actually a cult. They called themselves the A Cappella Churches of Christ. Not to say there aren't people there that truly loved Jesus and stuff, but it's very pharisaical, very ruled, extremely patriarchal. There was a lot of sexual abuse going on in the church. Lots and lots and lots, and that began, so I've always, that I can remember from 3-4 years old, always been spiritually aware. My maternal grandmother instilled the love of Jesus and Jesus stories in us, and I've always been in love with Jesus and God, and so I don't know, it was 3 or 4 when certain abuses started, and I got brave enough at age 16 to end it. You try to tell people, but I was told I was the one that was in the wrong, because you were a girl. If somebody did something to you, it was your fault, etc. and so forth. So that's how that was. So that's kind of history here. And then at age 18, I was going to go to veterinary school, actually. Then we didn't have we didn't have money. We were blue collar. My dad left his family's money and said he was going to do it on own. Very James Deany. And he was in the military, as were all the men, most of them. Priests or military is what most of them did. So wouldn't take his mom's money, and so ended up getting out because my mom didn't want to, raise kids alone, and anyway, I was not allowed to go in. My very Germanic father, very quiet, super bad temper, which he very rarely ever saw, because it was bad. And he forbid me. I forbid you. Do what the women do. Take care of the families. There you go. But he was okay with me going to nursing school because it was a nurse. But I couldn't let the military pay for it. There we go. So, in the battles between the spiritual battles of good and evil, we are born in this place into spiritual battle. That's just the way it is. And for reasons unknown to us, our family has a lot of spiritual giftings, on maternally and paternally, as far as wisdom, knowings. You can understand things. It's just, I believe they run in families, from my experience and what I've seen. And anyway, so ended up we just wanting to get away from home. Things weren't great, and I met the person that I would marry, age 17, introduced by a preacher who was also later convicted of crimes against young girls, who was apparently pretty habitual. Again, this was a cult, and that wasn't unknown of. So I was being groomed by him, and he introduced me to this person whom I married, who, we're just going to sum it all up, okay? Anything from Illuminati to witchcraft or whatever, and we're just going to call it Satanism. And that's what his family was a part of. Although many Satanists hide under the guise of religion or churches, being good, moral, upstanding people. That's what you would think. Many of them do that, and his family was one because they belonged to this church that was probably at least half Satanist in the tri-state area where I grew up. And I didn't know that, right? Thought he was the CFC, or I thought he was they look good, sound good, know the Bible. And so I met him, introduced to him, and then 13 weeks later, I married him. If that's not a recipe for disaster, I don't know what is. And was actually married for 20 years, but tried to get away with the children. After there was a time where I was able to be released. There's a long story there, and that didn't work. So imagine 20 years being married to somebody like that. Abuse out the wazoo, fear. Many things happened to my family, beyond a lot to anybody I got close to. So you're basically you become alienated from everybody for their safety, especially once you have children, for the safety of your own children. So much could be written about those years. And in fact, there was a lot of threats and demonstrations of power that would be done to keep you quiet or keep you compliant. And so, I kind of sum it all up to say there was double and triple speak. People, the way to learn how to cope, and again, being an artist, I would learn. I may not understand, but when survival dictates, or the welfare of your children, and I always was under the impression, and the way I was reading the double, triple speak messages, that I would not live long. And so therefore I was teaching my daughters to be okay without me. That's what I was trying to do without telling them. That's what I was trying to do. So, I mean, anyway, we're going to skip ahead from there. But in the end, that ended up costing us at age 25, my oldest daughter, in March of, February of 2012, where she was murdered, when it was ordered by her father. Satan always requires blood sacrifices, and loyalty is temporarily rewarded, but it is also punished. And so this was to teach us a lesson when she tried to cut off communications with him, and he knew she was very serious. She was She was done. So anyway, that kind of leads up to, and when I got divorced from them, I, again, being really autistic, and ended up, and I don't even know how it happened, but it did, getting myself into a plural marriage where I had 2 sons. And in that marriage and in my first marriage, I lost 2 sons. So there's that. And so when I left the plural marriage, it was, well, I left really for good after I lost the 3rd baby, my 3rd son. And a few months, 8 months later, my daughter was murdered, and there we go. So I was not in a good place. And through this time, I'd always loved Jesus. I mean, I became ordained in 2010. Always loved Jesus, always loved God, and I held on to that even all those years. And the Satanist thing, credit that to helping me survive some hits put out on me and things that I found out after the fact that was meant to kill me. But it didn't. It just created some chaos and things. So God is like my everything. I love Jesus. And so that, when all that happened, and then she was murdered, and I was single momming it, I was serving God as I had some people that I knew. I am not okay mentally. Because I believed, because God had protected us all those years. And so in a spiritual warfare, you can be close to God and still lose your life, or have people close to you be taken out. It happens. It's war. I wasn't in a good place, though, at that time. 2024 will be coming up on 13 years. We're currently at almost over 12 and a half years when she was murdered. I'm so much better now, but I wasn't okay. One of the coping mechanisms as a child and whatnot that I learned was to disassociate. So you throw this into the mix. Then I met my wounded warrior in 2012, and I didn't know how wounded he was. We didn't know how wounded he was. Suffice it to say, for those who are in the military or know anything, And again, I was grief insane. I don't even know. I was living disassociated most of the time, trying to function, and met my husband. I mean, he was the love of my life. Truly, truly, we resonated on a level in the ether. I knew who he was meant to be. It was just really incredible. But he was so, so tortured, not only physically, because when we now look back, he was already had cancer. We didn't find out about it though till 2014, in October of 2014, after a surgery that confirmed it. And he was already at stage 4. It was already metastasized. It was already in his lymph nodes and in his lower spine by the time they found it. And then that got me all back into medicine, albeit natural medicine side of things. So there we go. That is, here we are today. And during the years with my husband, I was so not okay. I was very upset with God for that period of time. And I met Mark just months after my daughter's murder. And I don't know, it was beyond electric. It was lightning bolts. We were soul fused. I don't know what it was. And I was angry with God. So my husband took that God place. There again, another recipe for disaster. And he was so not okay. And I just figured love could fix it. He'd be all right. Love could fix everything and anything. And although he professed, I mean, he knew Jesus and everything, he had not yielded his life to the Lord until just a scant few, 6, 8, somewhere between 6 and 9 weeks. That time was such a blur before he died, and that he was on hospice. He was, he did SF. I'm going to say paratrooper in war time. He was a boomer, retired military. Then he contracted with the military at the Pentagon for a while. He was there in the Pentagon on 9/11. There's so much there. I'm so proud of that. But his wounded side was, let's put it to you this way, 2 things. Once the cancer got bad enough where he was fired, he couldn't work anymore. He didn't want any part of disability. He had no choice. He adopted my sons. That was him. He wanted to. And he's like, oh, I can do so much for you guys. I want to make sure they're provided for after his cancer diagnosis, and I want to make sure you're okay. You're provided for, etc. and so forth. And they gave him 26 to 33 months, and he lived, 97 months, almost to the 97 months, yeah. And which was a miracle. But he got his disability in, I think it was 2018. They backdated it. Social Security and VA. The government rated him at 70% at that time. In January of 2019, we got a letter, and I have all this stuff, okay? We got a letter from the VA disabling him without us, asking for it or anything. He went from 70 to 100% permanent and total PTSD disabled. And his physical was another 70% on top of that. That doesn't happen So when I say it was crazy, y'all, it was crazy. And yeah, it was crazy. And it didn't help that there were a few years I just joined him in drinking. There we go. That just ramped it up to crazier. So the Lord brought us out of all of that. Out of all of that. He died sober. Um, and full confessionals and everything before he died. It was just too short of a good time. That was not even a way to put it. And how do you say your husband's in his right mind when he's dying? But that's what it took to make him that sweet Sarge that I always knew was there. So that's why we're here today. And so how does that apply to what's going on today? I feel like all of those years and everything I went through, and 8 months after my husband died, my mom died, and it wasn't good. But she had originally been the original holistic person in our family to teach us a lot of things. We didn't appreciate it at the time. We do now. But that is where #frog fully rely on God comes from. My mom was the one that began that frog thing. I think it was a thing years ago, and she just ran with it. And it was really big between her and Tanea. Tanea, my daughter that was murdered, that was her thing for her. And we all know it in the family. We're a very small family. That she was the first grandchild, and kind of like the favorite-ish, just because she was the first. And so that was a really big thing for Tanea, because we all went through so much, and so that was her thing for 10, frogging, and she would send her gifts because both of my daughters married Army men. And so, in memory to them, #fully rely on God. And that is what saved me, and my sanity came back. My health came back mentally, physically, and emotionally when I got enough counseling and therapy, had friends that were in 12-step groups, because alcoholism is everywhere around us. And that is where, between that and getting back into holistic medicine, fully relying on God. And, now through all of it, healthier than I've ever been. My faith has been tried, tested, and proven. From the top of the mountain to drowned, and then had life. God brought life back into me, into my marriage, into our family. And so we have health and life in every aspect, more abundant